I'm in my 60s now, but there's one memory I've carried with me for decades. A chilling story from January of 1969. That winter weekend was brutally cold, the world blanketed in a thick layer of white snow, and my father, Harold, thought it would be the perfect time for a family trip. Dad loved the outdoors. He thrived on the solitude, the crisp air, the smell of pine carried by the wind. I, on the other hand, wasn't a big fan of hiking or being far from people, but I admired his passion and wanted to be there for him. My twin sister Eliza felt the same way. He rented a cozy little cabin deep in the Appalachian forest. It was far from the city, far from traffic, and far from everything. The journey to the cabin. Getting there was no easy task. The narrow mountain roads twisted and turned through dense forest, and the tires occasionally slipped on icy patches, making my stomach clench with fear. But Dad drove like it was nothing new to him, humming softly while Mom kept glancing at the map, double-checking every turn. By the time we reached the cabin, the sun had already dipped below the horizon. The snow reflected the fading twilight, casting long shadows across the trees, and for a moment, the place felt almost magical, quiet, still, and detached from the rest of the world. That night was peaceful. We warmed ourselves by the fire, drank hot cocoa, and listened to the wind whistle softly outside. A walk through the woods. The next morning, after a simple breakfast of eggs and toast, Dad suggested a hike through the nearby woods. I hesitated. Walking deep into a frozen forest wasn't exactly how I pictured a relaxing vacation, but he was excited, and Eliza agreed to go, so I followed. The snow crunched under our boots as we ventured deeper. The air was sharp and cold against my face, and every breath came out in small clouds. It was beautiful, sure, but I couldn't shake a strange feeling of unease, as if something unseen was watching us from behind the trees. About 30 minutes in, we heard it. A scream. It wasn't an animal. At least, not one I'd ever heard before. It wasn't human either. Not exactly. It was an otherworldly sound, echoing through the trees, bouncing off the snow, and freezing us in place. Dad's expression changed immediately. He motioned for silence. "Stay close," he whispered, his breath fogging in the icy air. We stood still, listening, but the scream didn't repeat. That's when movement caught my eye. The stranger. From between the trees came a man. He looked wrong. His hair was wild, his clothes ragged, and slung over his shoulder was a bundle wrapped in colorful cloth. It swung gently as he jogged past, his boots crunching in the snow. He stopped just long enough to glance at us, his eyes wide and glassy, like he hadn't slept in days. And then he bolted into the woods, vanishing among the pines. My stomach knotted. Something about that man, his frantic expression, that bundle, made my skin crawl. "Time to head back," Dad said firmly. His voice was calm, but carried a weight that told us not to argue. We retraced our steps quickly, Dad looking over his shoulder every few seconds as though expecting something, or someone, to follow. By the time we reached the cabin, heavy snowflakes had started falling, carried by gusts of biting wind. Uneasy night. Inside, we stoked the fire and tried to shake off the tension, but the mood was different. I noticed Mom and Dad whispering in the corner, their voices low and serious. Words like report and missing floated in and out of their conversation, enough to keep me wide-eyed long after I crawled into bed. That night, the snowstorm grew intense, howling against the windows and rattling the cabin. I pulled the blanket up over my head, praying for morning. A disturbing discovery. The storm cleared by dawn, leaving everything outside covered in a fresh, perfect layer of snow. Dad decided we should head to the nearest town to tell someone about what we'd seen. The drive was tense, the car skidding slightly on the icy curves, and I kept replaying the image of that man's bundle swinging against his side. At the small police station, Dad told the officer everything. The scream, the man, the strange bundle. The officer's face darkened as he listened. "A boy named Dennis Martin disappeared a few days ago," he said. "He was staying with his family at a cabin about 5 miles from yours. Last anyone saw, he was playing near the woods. My chest tightened. The officer explained they'd been searching for days but found nothing, except for one unsettling clue: small footprints leading to a frozen stream. And stopping there, as if Dennis had simply vanished. The search that went nowhere. The search for Dennis intensified. Park rangers, volunteers, even military personnel combed the area. We gave statements several times and answered every question about the man we saw, but there were no solid leads. Days turned into weeks. The boy was never found. Whispers spread through the town. A bear attack, a tragic accident, or something worse. Some said he'd been kidnapped. My mind kept circling back to the man in the woods, his haunted eyes, and the mysterious bundle over his shoulder. Could it have been Dennis? Dad warned me not to jump to conclusions, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. A memory that won't fade. Eventually, the search ended, leaving behind only questions and grief. The case became one of those unsolved mysteries people still talk about to this day. Even now, decades later, I sometimes hear that scream in my dreams. I see that man's face, those frantic eyes, and the bundle swaying in the snow. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was everything. What I do know is this: forests hide secrets. Some of them, I think, were never meant to uncover. I've always loved the wilderness. There's something about stepping into nature's quiet embrace. No traffic, no neighbors, no constant noise. Just trees, fresh air, and silence so deep you can hear your own heartbeat. That's probably why I decided to take my first solo overnight camping trip last year, in 2023, when I was 18. I live in Northern California, a place full of towering evergreens and snow-capped trails. I thought it would be a rite of passage, a moment to prove I wasn't just a kid anymore. The plan. The trail I chose wasn't on most maps. My dad had shown it to me when I was younger. A hidden route through beautiful snowy terrain, far from patrolled paths and tourist crowds. I'd been there a dozen times before with him, but this time, I wanted to go alone. I packed light but smart. A sturdy tent, warm sleeping bag, food, water, propane stove, first aid kit, and 3 knives, because you don't take chances with mountain lions or bears. Dad drove me to the trailhead early that morning. The cold bit at my cheeks as I adjusted my pack and waved goodbye. I was excited, nervous too, but mostly excited. Into the woods. The hike was stunning. Snow blanketed everything, muting the world into soft white silence. The only sounds were the crunch of my boots and the occasional caw of a crow. By late afternoon, I found the perfect campsite, a small clearing surrounded by thick trees, protected from the wind but open enough to see the stars. I cleared a patch of snow, pitched my tent, and set up camp. After cooking a quick meal, I sat by my tiny propane stove, drinking hot cocoa while watching the sky shift from pink to deep navy blue. The forest at night is something else. Without city lights, the stars are endless, glittering like shards of glass scattered across black velvet. It felt peaceful, almost holy. That peace didn't last long. The first sound. I jolted awake sometime after midnight, my body rigid, heart pounding for no reason I could name. At first, I thought it was one of those random wake-ups you get while camping. New environment, different sounds. Then I heard it crunch, crunch, crunch. Slow, deliberate footsteps on snow. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. My first thought was animal, a fox or maybe a deer. They're common around here, but these steps were too heavy, too intentional. I reached slowly for the buck knife I'd placed beside me in the sleeping bag, gripping it tight enough that my knuckles ached. The footsteps circled the tent, slow and deliberate, like whoever, or whatever, it was wanted me to know they were there. Then came the sound that still gives me chills when I think about it. A deep, guttural hum. It wasn't a song. It wasn't even a proper note. It was just this long, droning sound, low and wet, like it was being forced from a throat that wasn't working right. The humming. I lay there, stiff as a board, my heart thudding so loud I thought they could hear it outside. Hum, Hum, hmm. It circled my tent as it hummed, rising and falling in pitch like some broken, warped melody. My first irrational thought was that it was a ranger trying to scare me for camping off-trail. But deep down, I knew better. No ranger hums like that at 1 a.m. while walking slow circles around a stranger's tent. I considered unzipping the flap, jumping out with my knife ready. But every instinct screamed, "Don't move, don't breathe, don't make a sound." I lay there, gripping the knife, body shaking from cold and fear. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours, and then, just as suddenly as it started, the humming stopped. The silence was worse than the sound. The scratching. I started to relax, thinking maybe whoever it was had left, when another sound cut through the silence. Scratch. Scratch. It came from a tree near my tent, slow, deliberate, as if something sharp was being dragged across the bark. My imagination ran wild. Long claws, broken tools, maybe even bones. I couldn't see anything. I couldn't even bring myself to unzip the tent. But I could feel it, whatever it was, out there in the dark. Then, without warning, something or someone bolted. Branches snapped, snow crunched violently, and within seconds, the forest was still again. The longest night of my life. I didn't sleep. I sat there, clutching that knife, eyes locked on the tent zipper as if my life depended on it. Every small sound outside, a breeze through the trees, a shift of snow, made me jump. When dawn finally broke, my body ached from tension and cold. I unzipped the tent slowly, knife still in hand, and stepped into the pale morning light. That's when I saw it. Deep gouges in the bark of the tree near my tent. Long, jagged lines, carved into the wood like claws, or something sharp being dragged deliberately. There was also a dark stain on the bark, thick and strange, almost like blood, but with a foul, decaying smell. I didn't investigate further. I packed my gear fast, barely caring about order, and got out of there as quickly as my legs could carry me. Back to safety. When I reached the trailhead, I collapsed by the road and called Dad. He picked up immediately, and an hour later, he was there in his truck, concern etched on his face. I didn't tell him everything at first, just that I'd heard something near my tent and it scared me. When we got home, I told him the full story, every detail. He believed me. But what could we do? Call the cops and say what? Hey, I was camping illegally and heard creepy humming in the middle of the night. Even now, months later, that sound still haunts me. Sometimes, late at night, I swear I hear it again. Not outside my window, but inside my own head. That guttural, broken hum circling me, moving closer and closer. And I wonder, was it a person? An animal? Or something else entirely? I don't know. I just know one thing. If I ever go camping alone again, it won't be anywhere near those woods. The cabin was supposed to be an escape, a quiet retreat from city chaos, a place where my family and I could breathe again. My wife and I had been feeling the weight of life pressing down, and we thought a secluded cabin deep in the woods would be the perfect weekend getaway. Our 22-year-old son, Marcus, wasn't thrilled about the idea. He was a big kid, strong, confident, a bit stubborn, and the thought of being trapped in the middle of nowhere with no Wi-Fi didn't exactly make him smile. But when my mom, his grandmother, said she wanted to come along, Marcus agreed without hesitation. He adored her. Arriving at the cabin. The cabin looked like something from a postcard, a snug wooden structure nestled among towering pines, a creaky porch swing, and the faint scent of moss and earth. Inside, it was cozy, worn, but welcoming. The first night passed peacefully. We roasted marshmallows in the fireplace, told silly ghost stories, and laughed about how isolated we were. No neighbors for miles. The rental listing had said that like it was a selling point. Back then, it sounded like paradise. By the second night, paradise had begun to feel like something else entirely. The uneasy silence. The forest felt darker, thicker, and the cabin's thin walls seemed to barely keep the outside world at bay. Strange sounds crept in, subtle at first. A crunch of leaves, a snap of a branch. I chalked it up to wildlife, but Marcus wasn't convinced. Around midnight, he approached me in the living room, his voice low but firm. "Dad, someone's out there." I frowned. "It's probably just a raccoon or deer, son. Go back to bed." He shook his head. Marcus wasn't the kind of guy to scare easily. "No, I saw him. A man. Just standing there, near the edge of the trees, watching the cabin." My stomach sank, but I tried to keep calm. I grabbed the flashlight from the kitchen drawer. "Let's check it out." The first encounter. We stepped onto the porch, the night air thick and cold. My flashlight beam swept across the clearing, catching nothing but shadows. For a moment, everything was silent, like the whole forest was holding its breath. "There," Marcus whispered, pointing toward the tree line. For just a second, I thought I saw movement, something too tall and too solid to be an animal. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice cracking the silence like a gunshot. "This is private property!" The shape didn't move. It just stood there. Marcus, impatient as always, took a step forward, but I grabbed his arm. "Stay here." We went back inside and locked the door. I told myself it was probably some hiker who'd lost their way, but the knot in my gut told me otherwise. The waiting game hours passed. Mom went to bed early, unaware of the tension that had settled over the cabin. Marcus stayed up with me, both of us pretending to watch a late-night talk show, our eyes flicking toward the window every few minutes. Around 3 a.m., it happened. A soft creak from the porch floorboards. Marcus and I exchanged a look. Without a word, he grabbed the fireplace poker while I snatched the kitchen knife. We crept toward the door, every muscle in my body screaming at me to turn back. Then, the doorknob rattled. "Who's there?" I barked, trying to sound braver than I felt. No answer. Marcus, impulsive as ever, yanked the door open. The intruder. A man stood there, pale, gaunt, with hollow, bloodshot eyes. His clothes were ragged, and his lips curled into a twisted smile that made my skin crawl. "Evening," he said calmly, almost politely. "What do you want?" Marcus demanded, stepping forward. The man tilted his head, considering. Then his gaze slid past us and locked on someone behind me. My mom had stepped into the hallway, clutching her robe around her. "I'm here for her," he said, pointing at her. At first, I didn't understand. Then I saw Mom's face, pale as paper. "Go back to your room, Mom," I said sharply. The man's smile widened. "She remembers me." "I don't know you," Mom whispered, though her voice wavered. "She remembers," he said again, stepping forward. "Not another step!" Marcus shouted, raising the poker. Violence on the porch. The man lunged faster than I thought possible. Marcus swung the poker, connecting with a sickening thud. But the man barely flinched. He grabbed Marcus's arm, twisted it, and the poker clattered to the floor. I lunged with the knife, but he shoved me aside like I weighed nothing, his focus entirely on my son. "No!" I shouted as the man tackled Marcus to the ground. Marcus fought back. He was strong, every punch and kick fueled by adrenaline. But the intruder was relentless. Then it was over. The man stood, breathing heavily, while Marcus lay motionless on the floor, eyes wide and unseeing. "I'm here for her." The intruder turned to my mom, who stood frozen, tears streaming down her face. "It's your fault," he said to her. "What are you talking about?" I demanded, voice cracking. My mom shook her head, sobbing. "I don't know him." "Liar," the man hissed, his calm demeanor snapping. "You left me to rot." For a second, the pieces clicked. My mom had always been secretive about her past, hints about an abusive ex-boyfriend she'd run from decades ago. Could this be him? Before I could move, he grabbed her wrist and yanked her toward the door. I lunged, but he backhanded me so hard I fell to the floor, dazed. "Don't follow us," he said coldly, "or you'll end up like him." I watched helplessly as he dragged my mother into the night, her terrified face disappearing into the darkness. The aftermath. When the police arrived the next morning, they found me sitting on the porch, Marcus's body covered with a blanket inside. I told them everything, but there were no leads, no trace of my mom or the intruder. To this day, I don't know what happened to her. Sometimes I wonder if she went willingly, weighed down by some guilt she never shared. Other times, I think she's still out there, held captive by a man from her past who refused to let go. But one thing I know for sure, those woods weren't a retreat.
They were a trap, a place where old sins came back to haunt us, and they took everything from me.